In the last video, we looked under the hood of large language models. Tokens, tokenization, pre-chaining, post-training, transformers, auto-regressive next token prediction, the whole pipeline. The point of that video was to demystify systems like ChatGPT. We saw that large language models are not minds. They are not conscious subjects. They do not know what they are saying in the way human beings know what they are saying. They are trained to predict and generate sequences of tokens based on patterns in data. Today, we ask what follows from that. If large language models generate plausible language without understanding, without moral responsibility, and without intrinsic concern for truth, what happens when they become major producers of public information? That is the central question. The issue isn't only that AI can generate false information. Human beings have always generated false information. The deeper issue is that AI can industrialize plausibility. It can mass produce text and images, audio, and video that appear meaningful, authoritative, intimate, or authentic, even when they are false, manipulated, or disconnected from any accountable speaker. So the problem we'll examine today isn't simply fake news. It is the transformation of the conditions under which truth, trust, evidence, and public communication operate. Let's begin by connecting today to what we learned last time. A large language model predicts tokens. Given a context, it estimates what is likely to come next. It does not consult reality in the way a person does. It does not perceive the world, does not care whether its output corresponds to reality. It generates language based on learned statistical patterns. Now, this doesn't mean that LLMs are always wrong. Often they are useful. They can summarize, explain, translate, classify, draft, brainstorm, and assist. Their basic operation isn't truth-seeking. Their basic operation is generation. That's a very important distinction. This distinction matters. Human beings can always speak falsely. When a human being makes a claim, we can ask whether they knew it was false, whether they intended to deceive, whether they misunderstood the evidence, whether they were negligent, or whether they were careless. Human communication is bound up with responsibility. With an LLM, the situation is different. The model does not lie, strictly speaking, because lying requires intention. To lie is to know or believe that something is false and to present it as true in order to deceive. A model has no such intention. This doesn't make its false outputs harmless, however. A system can produce falsehoods without lying. It can generate misinformation without intending to misinform. So, what we need is a more precise vocabulary. The problem isn't that LLMs are malicious speakers. The problem is that they produce plausible outputs without a lived relation to truth. They can imitate the form of explanation without being reasonable or responsible for that explanation. They can imitate testimony without being witnesses. They can imitate expertise without possessing understanding. That is why today we need to discuss truth and trust and not merely information. So let's define first the public sphere. The public sphere is the space in which citizens encounter information. They form opinions, discuss common concerns, criticize institutions, and deliberate about collective life. It includes journalism, universities, courts, parliaments, public broadcasting, social media, civil society, and ordinary public conversation. The public sphere depends on communication. Not just any communication, though, it depends on communication that can be assessed, challenged, verified, and attributed. If someone makes a claim in public, we need to know who said this, on what grounds, with what evidence, in what context. Are they reliable? Are they accountable? Can the claim be checked? This is what makes public reason possible. We do not all need to agree, obviously, but we need shared norms for disagreement. We need some distinction between evidence and fabrication, argument and manipulation, and between testimony and propaganda. Generative AI puts pressure on these norms because it can produce speech-like artifacts at scale without being a speaker in the moral sense. So it can produce articles and comments, fake reviews, political messages, images, videos, voices, and documents that circulate as if they came from persons or institutions. What's the result? Well, the result isn't only more content, it's a change in the ecology of trust. When the amount of synthetic content increases, the burden of verification also increases. When convincing fakes become cheap, authentic evidence becomes easier to doubt. When language becomes abundant and automated, attention becomes more vulnerable to manipulation. So today's central concern is this: AI may not destroy truth directly, but it may weaken the social conditions that allow truth to be recognized. And to understand this, we need to start with the concept of hallucination. In ordinary language, a hallucination is a perception of something that isn't there. In AI discourse, the term is used differently. An AI hallucination occurs when a model produces information that is false, fabricated, unsupported, or misleading while presenting it in a fluent and confident way. So, for example, a model may invent a legal case. It could fabricate a citation, misstate a historical fact, create a non-existent book title, or attribute a quotation to the wrong author. It may do this with perfect grammar and calm authority. But why does this happen? Because an LLM is not retrieving truth from a database. It is generating probable continuations. If a fabricated citation looks like the kind of citation that should exist in that context, the model may produce it. If a false explanation fits the linguistic pattern of an answer, the model may generate it. The model is optimizing for plausible continuation, not for truth as such. Post-training, if you remember from the previous episode, can reduce hallucinations. Retrieval systems can help by connecting models to external documents. Tool use can improve reliability, but the basic risk remains. Fluent generation can outrun verification. This is why hallucination is so dangerous in educational, legal, scientific, and journalistic contexts. The user may not be able to tell when the system is wrong. The more polished the output, the more credible it may appear. Hallucination isn't merely a technical bug. It is an epistemic problem. It concerns the very conditions of knowledge. So let's ask the question deeper. What is truth? Quod est veritas? Well, there are many philosophical theories. For today, we can begin with a basic idea. Truth involves some kind of correspondence or fit between what is said and what is the case. So, if I say, it's raining outside, the statement is true if it is, in fact, raining outside. If I say the exam is oral, the statement is true if the exam, well, really is oral. The truth concerns reality. It is not merely what sounds good, what is persuasive, or what is statistically likely in a next text sequence. In social life, we rarely verify everything directly. I do not personally verify every scientific result I believe. I do not personally expect every historical archive. I do not personally witness every political event. Much of what I know comes through testimony, institutions, documents, experts, teachers, journalists, databases, and social trust. This means that knowledge is socially mediated. We depend on reliable chains of communication. We trust that some people have checked what we have not checked. We trust that institutions preserve evidence. We trust that experts have methods. We trust that journalists distinguish reporting from invention. We trust that citations point to real sources. Generative AI complicates these chains. It can produce the appearance of testimony without a witness, the appearance of a citation without a source, the appearance of expertise without understanding, the appearance of evidence without accountability. This is why AI-generated misinformation is not just another form of error. It can mimic the social forms through which truth normally travels. Now, there are three concepts worth distinguishing: misinformation, disinformation, and bullshit. Misinformation is false or misleading information shared without the intention to deceive. A person may repeat a false claim because they genuinely believe it. They're wrong, but they're not necessarily malicious. Disinformation is false or misleading information shared with the intention to deceive. Here, the person knows, or at least strongly suspects, that the information is false and spreads it strategically. Bullshit is different. The philosopher Harry Frankfurt famously argued that bullshit is not primarily defined by falsity. It is defined by indifference to truth. The liar at least cares about truth enough to hide it. The bullshitter does not care whether what they say is true or false. They care about producing an effect, persuasion, impression, advantage, status, or manipulation. And this distinction is very useful for thinking about generative AI. An LLM is not a liar because it does not intend to deceive. It is not a moral agent. Its outputs can resemble bullshit in Frankfurt's sense because they are generated without intrinsic concern for truth. The system produces language that may be true or false. Truth is not the internal norm of the generator. Now, that doesn't mean that every output is bullshit. Many outputs are accurate and useful. Structurally, the system can produce truth-like language without truth-directed agency. This is a major philosophical issue. Human communication normally presupposes a speaker who can be asked, "Do you mean this? Do you believe this? Why should we trust you? What evidence do you have?" With AI-generated content, those questions become unstable. This brings us to plausibility. Generative AI is powerful because it produces plausible content. Plausibility isn't truth. Plausibility means that something appears credible, coherent, familiar, or likely within a given context. A fake academic paragraph can sound plausible because it uses the right vocabulary. A fake news article can sound plausible because it imitates journalistic style. A fake image can look plausible because it follows visual conventions. A fake voice message can sound plausible because it reproduces tone and accent. The danger is that human beings often use plausibility as a shortcut for credibility. We don't have time to verify everything, so we rely on signs, professional formatting, confident tone, recognizable genre, institutional style, emotional resonance, social endorsement. Generative AI can reproduce these signs cheaply, and this creates a gap between appearance and warrant. A piece of content may look credible without having been produced through credible processes. It may look researched without any research. It may sound expert without expertise. It may feel personal without a person. In media terms, AI can separate the surface markers of credibility from the practices that traditionally justified credibility. That is why AI-generated content is especially challenging. It doesn't merely create false claims, it creates false appearances of epistemic legitimacy. So, now let's move from text to synthetic media more broadly. Generative AI can produce text, images, audio, and video. It can generate fake photographs. It can clone voices, create artificial presenters, imitate writing styles, produce fake interviews, fabricate screenshots, and manipulate video footage. Deepfakes are synthetic or manipulated media in which someone appears to say or do something they didn't actually do or say. The most obvious examples involve political figures and celebrities or private individuals. The phenomenon is broader than politics. It includes scams, harassment, reputation attacks, fake evidence, fake intimacy, and synthetic pornography. Deepfakes matter because images, voices, and videos have traditionally carried special evidentiary force. We often say, "I saw it with my own eyes." Video appears to bring us closer to the event itself. Audio appears to preserve the voice of the speakers. Synthetic media weakens that assumption. Seeing is no longer believing, or at least it should not be. Now, this doesn't mean images and video are now useless as evidence. It does mean, however, that we need a new verification practice: provenance, metadata, trusted capture systems, forensic analysis, institutional verification, media literacy. These become more important, not less. But the deeper problem is that synthetic media attacks trust at the level of perception. It doesn't only tell us false things, it shows us false things. So, there are two major dangers with deepfakes. The first is that false things become believable. A fake video may persuade people that an event occurred. A cloned voice may convince someone to transfer money. A fabricated image may inflame political anger. A fake recording may damage someone's reputation. That's the obvious danger. The second danger is more subtle and perhaps more corrosive. True things become deniable. This is sometimes called the liar's dividend. When people know that deepfakes exist, a guilty person can dismiss real evidence as fake. A real video can be called AI generated. A real recording can be dismissed as synthetic. The existence of fakes gives liars a new defense. So, synthetic media threatens truth in two directions. It can make falsehood more believable. That's one. And it can make truth easier to doubt. This creates a crisis of evidence. In a healthy public sphere, evidence can discipline power. A photograph, a recording, a document, or a video can expose wrongdoing. If every piece of evidence can be plausibly dismissed as fake, accountability weakens. The danger then is not only deception, it's cynicism. People may stop asking what is true and begin assuming that everything is manipulation. And that is politically dangerous. So after speaking about that, we need to talk about epistemic trust, since we brought it up a number of times. Epistemic trust is trust related to knowledge. It is the trust we place in sources, speakers, institutions, methods, and communities when forming beliefs. We trust teachers to teach responsibly. We trust scientists to follow methods. We trust courts to weigh evidence. We trust journalists to report rather than invent. We trust archives to preserve records, right? We trust witnesses to describe what they saw. We trust platforms, at least to some degree, to distinguish authentic accounts from automated manipulation. No society can function without epistemic trust. Absolute skepticism is impossible. We cannot personally verify everything. We must rely on others. So trust is fragile. Too little trust produces cynicism. Too much trust produces gullibility. A healthy public sphere requires calibrated trust, neither naive belief nor total suspicion. Generative AI disrupts calibration. It makes it easier to produce credible-looking falsehoods. It makes it harder to identify authorship. It increases the volume of content. It accelerates circulation. It enables personalization at scale. It can flood the public sphere with noise. The result is epistemic overload. People encounter more information than they can evaluate. When overloaded, they rely on emotion, identity, group loyalty, or familiar narratives. This is where misinformation becomes socially powerful. It doesn't need to convince everyone. It only needs to confuse enough people, polarize enough groups, or exhaust enough attention. So, having said that, let's connect AI now to the public sphere more directly. A democratic public sphere depends on the possibility of shared facts. People can disagree about values and policies, interpretations, priorities. If they cannot agree on any evidence, public deliberation becomes extremely difficult. Generative AI can intensify several of these existing problems. First, it can scale propaganda. Automated systems can generate thousands of messages adapted to different audiences simultaneously. Second, it can personalize manipulation. Different people can receive different versions of a message based on their fears and their interests or their vulnerabilities. Third, it can simulate consensus. Bots and synthetic accounts can create the impression that many people believe something. Fourth, it can accelerate outrage. Emotionally charged content can be produced and tested rapidly. And fifth, it can pollute search and information ecosystems. So that is, if low-quality generated content floods the web, it becomes harder to find reliable sources. And these risks don't come from AI alone. They depend on platforms, incentives, politics, advertising models, media habits, and obviously human actors. AI can amplify all of these. So the question is not whether AI causes misinformation. The question is how AI changes the scale, the speed, cost, and credibility of misinformation. Now, I think it merits considering education, because it's an important topic and an important area in which this is inserted. Students now live in an environment where AI can generate essays and summaries, explanations, study notes, fake sources, discussion posts, and entire arguments. And this creates obvious problems for assessment. But there is a deeper issue beyond that one. Education is not only about producing correct text, it's about forming judgment. It's about learning how to ask questions, to evaluate sources, distinguish strong arguments from weak ones, and fundamentally taking responsibility for what one claims. If a student outsources too much of their cognitive labor to AI, they may produce better looking work while developing weaker understanding. So the danger is not just cheating, that's low resolution surface level. The danger is intellectual dependency. And at the same time, AI can nonetheless be educationally useful. It can explain difficult contexts, give explanations for concepts. It can translate, generate examples. It can quiz students. It can support accessibility. So the question then shifts from whether AI should be banned or embraced wholesale. The question is how it can be used in ways that strengthen rather than weaken judgment. And this connects to today's topic because misinformation resists what is required by education. Students need to learn not only how to use AI, but how to question AI. They need to ask, where did this claim come from? Is it verifiable? What source supports it? What assumptions are built into the answer? What is missing? Could this be hallucinated? In an AI-saturated public sphere, critical thinking is not optional but a civic infrastructure. So that's education. Now we have responsibility. And what does that exactly mean? Well, who is responsible when AI-generated content deceives? And the answer to that is rarely simple. Let's consider a fake AI-generated image used in a political campaign. Responsibility may involve the person who created the image, right? Or maybe the campaign that distributed the image. The platform that amplified it? The model developer who built the tool? Or maybe the regulator who failed to set standards, and the audience members who shared it without any verification at all. We need to avoid one mistake here. Blaming the model as if it were a moral agent. No. The model isn't responsible in the human sense. It doesn't intend, doesn't know, or choose, or answer for its actions. Responsibility lies with human beings and institutions. Responsibility may be distributed, yeah. Modern technological harms often emerge from networks of actions. Designers, deployers, users, platforms, advertisers, policymakers, publics, different publics. This is why responsible innovation matters. We cannot wait until harm occurs and then ask only who clicked generate. We must examine the design history. Were misuses and the risks associated with that anticipated? Were safeguards included? Were provenance tools even available? Were platforms prepared for this? Were incentives aligned towards truth or to engagement? Responsibility isn't only backwards looking, it is also forward looking. It asks what we must do now to prevent predictable harm. So, what can be done? Well, let's begin with design interventions. One intervention is content provenance. Provenance systems try to preserve information about where a piece of media came from, how it was created, and whether it has been modified. If a photograph, video, or audio file can carry trustworthy information about its origin, users may have better tools for verification. Another intervention is watermarking, where We attempt to mark AI-generated content so that it can be identified later. And this can be helpful, though it's not perfect. Watermarks can sometimes be removed or altered or avoided altogether. The third intervention that we could take is model behavior design. Systems can refuse to generate certain deceptive content, such as impersonations or fake evidence or targeted political manipulation. They can include friction when users request risky outputs. A fourth intervention is transparency or explainability. Users should know when they are interacting with AI, when content is AI generated, and when outputs may be unreliable. A fifth intervention is traceability for high-risk uses. In contexts like journalism, law, education, and politics, there may need to be a stronger documentation of how AI tools are used. And I know design cannot solve everything. Technical tools can help, but social trust needs to be paired with technical fixes. And that brings us to governance. Governance includes laws and regulations, institutional policies, professional standards, platform rules, and public norms. For example, public advertising may require disclosure when synthetic media is used. Platforms may be required to label manipulated content. News organizations may develop standards for AI-generated material. Universities may create policies for AI use in student work. Courts may need rules for evaluating synthetic evidence. Companies may need audit processes for high-risk models. Governance should not be understood as anti-innovation. Good governance can make innovation more trustworthy. If people know that systems are accountable, they may be more willing to use them responsibly. But governments must be careful. Overly broad regulation can restrict legitimate expression and research, satire, accessibility tools, and of course, creative work. Under-regulation can allow manipulation and harm. So the challenge is always proportionality. We need stronger rules where risks are high: elections, courts, healthcare, financial systems, education, identity. Intimate harms, lower risk creative uses may require lighter governance. This is a classic responsible innovation problem: how to preserve beneficial uses while reducing foreseeable harms. But there is a further governance question here that I think will dominate the next decade. It is what Pope Leo XIV calls the problem of alignment insufficiency. In his 2026 encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, he argues that aligning AI to a particular set of values is necessary but insufficient. The deeper question is whose values are being encoded and whether the public has any say in deciding. If alignment is determined privately by a small number of actors, the moral vision of those actors becomes the invisible infrastructure of public life. A more moral AI is not enough if that morality is determined by a few. That is a question for democratic deliberation, not engineering alone. So the goal isn't control for its own sake. The goal is to protect the conditions of truth and dignity and public trust. And because of that, media literacy is another essential response to these issues. Media literacy must evolve. In the past, media literacy often meant asking who produced this message, what's the source, what evidence is given, what perspective is represented, what is omitted, who benefits. Those questions still matter. Now we also need AI literacy. Students and citizens need to ask, could this have been generated or manipulated? Is the image authentic? Is the voice real? Is the citation real? Does the source even exist? Is this account human? Was this message personalized for me? Is this content trying to provoke emotion rather than inform judgment? Media literacy must also include emotional literacy then. Misinformation often spreads because it makes people angry or afraid or proud or morally outraged. The emotional force of content can bypass careful evaluation. So, one practical rule: when content produces an immediate strong emotional reaction, pause before sharing. And I know that sounds simple, but it matters. The speed of digital media rewards instant reaction. Responsible citizenship requires slowing down. And this links to the final line of our previous lecture, if you recall. Philosophy slows us down. In the age of generative AI, slowing down isn't passivity. It is resistance to manipulation. So let's come back and let's go back to the philosophical level. The problem of AI and truth is ultimately a problem of mediation. Human beings don't encounter public reality directly. We encounter it through media and language, images, institutions, platforms, witnesses, experts, archives, documents, and increasingly algorithmic systems. Every medium shapes what can be seen, said, believed, and shared. Generative AI is a new kind of mediator because it does not merely transmit messages, it produces them. It does not merely distribute content, it can synthesize content. It does not merely amplify human speech, it can simulate it. This changes the relation between communication and agency. When a human being writes an article, there is a speaker who can be questioned. When a journalist publishes a report, there is an institution that can be held accountable. When a scholar cites a source, there is a chain of evidence. When AI produces a fluent answer, the output may lack a stable, authorial responsibility. Of course, human beings remain behind the system. Developers and users, deployers, companies. The communicative form becomes ambiguous. It looks like speech. It is not speech in the full human sense. And this is why we must not treat AI-generated communication as ordinary communication. It is a hybrid artifact produced by systems, prompted by users, trained on human data, shaped by corporate design, received as language. Its ethics must reflect that complexity. So now I think we can finally formulate the central danger. The deepest danger isn't that everyone will believe everything is fake, right? That is unlikely. The deeper danger and the deepest danger is that people may lose confidence in the very possibility of knowing what is true. This is epistemic cynicism. Epistemic cynicism says everything is propaganda, every image is fake, every institution lies, every expert is bought, every claim is manipulation, so I will believe whatever fits my group, my identity, or my emotions. That condition is dangerous because it destroys the basis of public reasoning. A society does not collapse only when people believe falsehoods. It also collapses when people stop caring whether claims are true. This is why Frankfurt's idea of bullshit is so important. Indifference to truth may be even more corrosive than lying. Generative AI can contribute to this if it floods the public sphere with plausible but ungrounded content. The result isn't only deception, it's exhaustion. People become tired of checking. They retreat into tribes. They distrust everything except what confirms them. So the defense of truth today requires more than fact-checking. It requires rebuilding trust, strengthening institutions, improving transparency, educating judgment, and designing technologies that respect the public sphere. Truth is not self-maintaining. It depends on practices. So now, having said that, let's bring everything back to responsible innovation. Responsible innovation asks us to anticipate consequences, include stakeholders, identify values, and design technologies that expand rather than reduce our ability to meet moral obligations. Applied to AI in the public sphere, this means asking, does this system support or undermine public reason? Does it help people understand reality, or does it merely produce engagement? Does it strengthen accountability, or does it create plausible deniability? Does it empower citizens, or does it manipulate attention? Does it support journalism, education, and democratic deliberation, or does it flood the information environment with synthetic noise? These questions should be asked before deployment, not only after harm occurs. The values at stake include truth and trust, accountability, transparency, autonomy, dignity, fairness, and democratic participation. A responsible AI system for the public sphere should not be judged only by whether it produces fluent content. It should be judged by whether it improves the epistemic environment in which human beings form beliefs and make decisions. That is a much higher standard. It is a standard we need. So let me conclude. In the previous video, we saw that large language models generate language through token prediction. Today, we have examined the social consequence of that fact. If AI systems generate plausible language without understanding and synthetic media without witness, the public sphere faces a serious challenge. The challenge is not simply technological, it is philosophical and ethical and political and cultural. We must distinguish truth from plausibility, testimony from generated output, error from misinformation, disinformation, and bullshit. We must understand that deepfakes make falsehood believable and truth deniable. We must recognize that epistemic trust is fragile and that public reason depends on institutions and practices and virtues. The solution isn't panic. The solution isn't blind optimism. The solution is responsible judgment. We need better design, better governance, better media literacy, better institutional accountability, better habits of attention. We need to slow down and verify, question, and resist the temptation to share before thinking. And above all, we need to remember that truth is not produced automatically by technology. It is produced and pursued by persons and communities committed to reality. AI can assist that pursuit, but it can also undermine it. The difference will depend on how we design it, how we govern it, and how we responsibly use it. That is where the series began, and it is where it has to end, with us, with the kind of attention, intelligent, reasonable, and responsible subjects we are willing to become in an age of powerful machines. So I want to thank you for following the series. If these videos have been useful, the most useful thing you can do is take any one of these ideas into a conversation with someone you care about. The public sphere isn't repaired in front of a screen, it is repaired across a table. Until next time.